started.
Good afternoon. Welcome to iNACOL's October Leadership Webinar. My clock here says 2 p.m. Eastern Time, so we can go ahead and get started as some other folks continue to trickle in here. Thank you all so very much for attending today. We're looking forward to a really terrific discussion this afternoon, and really excited to get some insights from Tony Wan and Meg Hamill from EdSurge on what personalized learning looks like across the country. So my name is Natalie Abel, and I'm a program manager here at iNACOL, and I'll be helping to facilitate today's webinar. So before we get started, I have just a couple housekeeping items to quickly go through. In the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a chat box, and many of you have already introduced yourself, but if you haven't, please take a second to introduce yourself. We'd love to know who you are, where you're tuning in from, what work you're doing in personalized learning, and any questions that you might have as well. We really want this to be a lively, engaging discussion in the chat box today too. So we encourage you to share your own experiences and insights. That way we can learn from you as well. And we'll save time at the very end for Q&A. So please ask your questions as we go, and we'll be sure to pose those questions to our presenters. Also, we encourage you to share what you're learning on Twitter. So we'll drop some information into the chat box, and you can use the webinar hashtag and connect with us at iNACOL on Twitter, as well as our presenters. So you can share what you're learning on Twitter with your peers and learning communities. Today's webinar will be recorded and archived on the inacol.org website. So we will send you all a follow-up email within the next couple of days that'll have a link where you'll be able to download all the slides from today's presentation, as well as access the full webinar recording. So you'll be able to revisit any discussions that we have this afternoon, refer back to something you've missed, or share that archived webinar with any of your colleagues or peers who might be interested as well. If at any time during the webinar you have audio issues, please let me know in the chat box, and we can try to work through that together, and I can share some instructions on ways to level set your microphone and speaker levels to optimize your experience here with us today. And with that, I am now grateful to turn it over to Tony of EdSurge to explore what personalized learning looks like across the United States and to share some information about their 50 States project. So, Tony, I will now turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Natalie, and thank you to all of you from across the country joining us this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, depending on where you are across the world. As Natalie said, my name is Tony, and I am the managing editor at EdSurge, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you virtually as we share a little bit about this ongoing editorial project. For some of you who know EdSurge, you may know us from the stories and the editorial content that we produce in the form of articles, newsletters, and guides like this 50 States project. If you want a teaser, there is a bit.ly link on this slide, which I hope that you can all see, that you can go check out. Or you can stay on here on the Blackboard Collaborate, and we'll walk you through some of our high-level findings from the stories that we've shared. With me here today is my colleague Meg Hamill. Meg, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Tony, and thanks again, Natalie and Ashley. Looking forward to seeing you both, hopefully, at the iNACOL Symposium in a couple of weeks, where we are actually going to dig a little deeper into some of these issues at our session. So if any of you are going to be there, please, feel free to stop by and say hi. My name is Meg Hamill. I'm the Director of Research at EdSurge. I was an educator in Henrico County Public Schools, and I saw that somebody is from Henrico that joined the chat. Hi, John. And also a whole bunch of people from Virginia. So it's nice to to see you or to see your name show up in the chat. We're in San Francisco, but really excited to tell you a little bit more about what we're learning across the country. All right. So for those of you who don't know EdSurge, EdSurge is a news and media company that reports exclusively on education innovation and technology. We share stories about educational practices, how technology plays a role in teaching and learning, and what is being funded and developed by entrepreneurs to help support education. We try to bring audiences together to solve problems of practice through storytelling, but we also host events and we connect job seekers to prospective employees and conduct research to inform the educational ecosystem. And with that, I am going to hand it back over to Tony to talk a little bit more about what this project is.
Great. Yeah, so what is the 50 States Project? In a nutshell, this is a running series of stories that now span 154 articles from 158 educators across the United States. And that includes D.C. and the island of Puerto Rico as well. As Meg said, we are based in the West Coast in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we do recognize that there's often a coverage bias. For many media companies to focus on some of the more higher density urban areas where a lot of the action is happening. But we also recognize that teaching and learning happen everywhere across the country, and we'd be remiss if we gloss over the hard work of educators and students and entrepreneurs that are happening in all 50 states of our nation. So this is a project that started in 2014 as an experiment with a pretty simple proposition, which is, can we get a teacher from each state to share a story about their experience with technology, whether it's the good, the bad, or sometimes the ugly. Because we believe that it's really important to give educators a voice as they adopt and adapt new practices that technology enables. We know that sometimes teachers naturally go, they're pretty savvy and go pick and choose their own tools. Sometimes, tools are handed to them from the top. I think regardless of where technology comes from, I think teaching ultimately is a personal craft, and we wanted to highlight their personal experiences, both the wins and the struggles. So we've collected stories written by educators by educators. There are teachers, librarians, technology specialists, administrators, superintendents, and others from across the country. So over the years, we've tailored the 50 States Project according to different themes. In 2015, our first project, we noticed that there were some general themes that emerged. Some of these included a school tour, which is sometimes educators will write about the different things they're trying in new and innovative school models and how they've retooled their classrooms and the campus with old and new technologies. Then the popular theme for that first year was professional development. And a lot of the teachers in this 2015 series shared a lot of ideas and tips around things like badging, how to leverage Twitter chats, and opportunities to join fellowships or attend free conferences to expand their practices. There's also a lot of how-to pieces, as teachers shared a little bit about the step-by-step ways that they leverage technology into their instructions, with devices like iPads or softwares like online gradebooks and communication tools. So there are also a series of how-to articles in the first year of this project as well. And then finally, we wanted to give educators a voice around how they really feel about issues like technology, Common Core, testing, and other hot-button issues. So those were the 4 themes that kind of naturally emerged from the first year that we did this project. Meg, you want to share a little bit about the 2016 project?
Absolutely. So with 2015's themes were pretty broad. 2016, 50 States Project gets a little bit more narrow. So designed to support educators back to school, we published articles that really were to provide best strategies for supporting learning using technology. And in this collection, educator stories become practical resources for teachers and administrators no matter what region they're in. The themes that came from this collection had to include how-tos from inside the classroom. These were guides from everything from different approaches to technologies to just how to set up certain things. So a lot of those articles are going to be set up to really break down how to do certain things. For example, Rachel Pearson, an educator from Minnesota, wrote a piece on teaching creativity, but through project-based learning. Her article breaks down the steps and the tools she used to make PBL effective in her classroom. Another theme, using data, always something that people want to learn more and more about. So these were, which assessments people use, how they used it, how they did use data to tailor and improve instruction. An example of that is in our New Jersey writer, Chris, shares his methods for using data to drive instruction, but used a free and effective tool, which I know a lot of people are looking for. Data tools can be extremely expensive. We never can get enough of professional development, another theme from this year. Strategies for revamping. I think just as educators want to revamp lessons and think about the individual needs of students, schools and administrators want to do the same for the staff on their teams. And then finally, what educators want from digital tools. That is a rapidly changing ecosystem and an environment, and people want to know, which tools have worked and which tools haven't. So that last bucket is all about that. So this year, the 2017 50 States project is all about personalized learning. And why? Well, educators have been shaping learning experiences to answer the distinctive needs of individual students for years. And whether you call this practice personalized learning, individualized instruction, differentiation, it continues to ignite hopes that education can meet the needs and realize the goals of each and all learners. As we've talked and listened to both educators and companies, the term personalized learning was mentioned more than any other pedagogy or initiative. So we started asking, how are educators actually tailoring student learning, and what does it look like in practice? Our goal with the 50 States project this year was twofold. One, to celebrate and share the best teaching and learning practices that are aimed at addressing students' unique needs. And two, to provide our readers with a resource to share and discover these practices. That seems simple enough, but this year's project was actually pretty complex, especially due to one thing, which Tony's going to take on right now.
Yeah, so one of the, one of the first problems with this term personalized learning is how do you necessarily define it, right? Is it a thing? Is it a tool? Is it a practice? What is personalized learning? Well, what the writers have shown through the pieces they shared in this year's project is that the meaning of the term and how it is interpreted is often very personal in itself, and it's based on one's environment, resources, access, their students, the environment, their culture. What we've learned is that how teachers personalize and tailor their instruction can also very much depend on the relationship with the students and with the peers as well. So a couple, a trio of stories that fall into this bucket kind of help illustrate the range of ways that people interpret the term. At a very tactical level, Jenny Magiera, who has been an administrator at 2 different Chicago districts, offers a helpful continuum to illustrate the range of tactics that are often associated with personalized learning. You'll see on this slide that there is a graph with 2 arrows. At the left end of that spectrum, there's what she calls siloed differentiation, where personalized learning is usually a combination of formative assessments and digital programs that automate instructions for students. So this is an extreme case where students might walk into a classroom, they may see their digital schedule that is personalized for their needs, and they'll work through a playlist of video lessons and virtual worksheets or quizzes. In this very extreme example, the teacher is relegated more or less to the role of the proctor in making sure that students simply log on, they get started, and they stay on task. At the other end of this spectrum is what she calls authentic inquiry-based learning, where students pretty much have free reign in class to explore their curiosities and passions. In this environment, the students have an agency to determine their own schedule and to help direct the course of their own learning based on what they're interested in. And in this model, teachers generally act as coaches, guides, and facilitators along the way, but the student is really the main protagonist, the main actor in this journey. Now, these are two extremes on the continuum. The one on the left, where technology takes over, is definitely not ideal by any means, and it's certainly not what we hope personalized learning means for a lot of people. On the other end, the other extremity, that may just simply not be feasible to have a class full of students all deciding what they want to do and doing what they want to do. What Jenny's point is that, most often an educator's instructional practice that works best for them, what she calls a happy place, will fall somewhere in between these two spectrums. In another story, we have Valerie Gates, who was Utah's 2016 Teacher of the Year, and she teaches at West High School in Salt Lake City. She talks about how, for her, personalized learning means developing personal relationships beyond the classroom. So in her story, she writes about a freshman girl who had kind of the tough kid persona, hard to reach, a little bit cold, not very open to sharing in the classroom. But Valerie learned through a writing assignment that for this student, she wrote that her boxing coach was her rock in life. So what Valerie did is she went to one of her practices and discovered that in doing so, the student saw that Valerie showed respect and tapped into a personal interest that was very meaningful to the student and gave her passion a sense of dignity. She also wrote about female refugee students who often get married early and afterwards don't come back to school. When she learned about this, she arranged for after-school visits to their homes and to their families, and she devotes 1 day per week to these home visits. When her own children were young, she used to bring them along as well. What she learned was that these visits really widened the students' and families' circle of trust, and kept these female refugee students engaged and coming back to school. So for Valerie, what she found was that a student's responses, reactions, and behaviors, all of these can all change when teachers seek and find commonality with students. For her, that commonality leads to honoring dignity, and respecting dignity that leads to some thoughtful, personalized instruction. Along similar lines, the first story that I want to share a little bit is from Mark Sorensen, who is the co-founder and CEO of the Star School in Arizona, which lies on the southwestern edge of Navajo Nation. So at Star, his main goal is to prepare students for the 21st century while also honoring their unique cultural identity. Mark says that history for his students offers a very important context for his mission, because for many decades in his region, the federal government had been operating boarding schools in these communities with the explicit purpose of trying to detach the students from their native identities and from their cultures. And it's because of this long history of this intent that many parents in the community view schools as painful places, and many students view these schools as irrelevant. So what Mark tried to do is try to create a school culture that honors the values of the Navajo community, and that includes embedding instruction within the instruction an ancient Navajo system of conflict resolution, along with activities that teach children about personal choice and responsibility and how they are interconnected. And it's through this way that Mark and his educators help keep the core Navajo cultural values of warm and caring relationships while encouraging students to be autonomous and to empower them with the skills that they need. So across these three stories, one of the things that we see is that when it comes to personalized learning, yes, it's often associated with technologies, and there's a range of uses that you can bring into your instructional practices, but more often, it's more about developing personal relationships with the families, the students, and the broader community. There are also technological components to it as well, and Meg will share a little bit about what we've learned from these next three writers.
Thanks, Danny. So in 2017, we are thinking about personalized learning, and a lot of the educators I speak with really are like, well, what are the approaches that people are used? What is the technology that helps make it a reality? And for these educators, you'll see that it's really different for each one. There are a number of different curriculum, instructional design, product, or technology decisions that educators make when they implement personalized learning. And what we learned from our Wisconsin writer, Jonna Knoll, who is the executive director of Norris Academy, is that you can actually redesign everything. So for her, tradition and history points to an environment where learning was really focused on accountability and rigidity and really well-defined roles. Well, at Norris Academy, which is a small rural school district in Wisconsin, they sought to create a new, innovative, student-centric version of a school to give more thought to how they might meet the needs of their disadvantaged students and to help those that succeed in school already accelerate and really see their full potential. So the school's redesign aimed to build students' self-efficacy and agency. So they decided that there were no more classrooms, no more teachers, no more scope and sequence, and pacing guides. Now I'm sure that makes a few of you start to sweat a little bit, that's really a scary thing to get rid of all those things. But Norris Academy embraced a model that leverages a robust learner profile to design multidimensional plans and pathways with learners. The personal pathways include anytime, anywhere learning experiences that include competencies across 4 dimensions. And those 4 dimensions are academic, employability, citizenship, and personal wellness. For this school, though, change came rather slowly. They had a lot of planning to do. So their biggest challenge was changing the culture and the roles. Everything got a makeover. Each learner and teacher now co-creates learning plans along those tracks. And those tracks provide a framework of key competencies that learners must attain. And so if you are thinking about an alternative model for a whole school, this article will definitely point you in the right direction. Another way educators sort of approach personalized learning doesn't have to be an entire school remodel. Jeff Heck Williams from Washington, D.C., who is the founder and director of curriculum instruction at Two Rivers Public Charter School, they aim to create just more voice and choice for students. They took a personalized learning attribute and they said, this is what we're going to hone in on. And this way, students are able to engage and inspire others and have more ownership in their learning. To do so, they use a problem-based learning approach called expeditions. They believe that PBL's approach to not only help students master skills, but also to develop the character and collaboration skills, allowing learners to solve problems, but also to develop deep content knowledge. Jeff also mentions that choice is a core element of their approach, but it's carefully controlled. It's carefully controlled by teachers who create these things they call guardrails. It's a mechanism where teachers adjust the level and amount of choice based on the learner's level and competency. Choice will look very different at a 4th grade level versus a 6th grade level. Here's a really good example of how they implement guardrails in order to give students choice, but to also keep structure and control in the classrooms. He writes, setting up an appropriate guardrail for 4-year-olds requires acknowledgement of their developmental needs. Children this young need both structure and flexibility. Without some structure, students wouldn't have been able to build a strong foundation for their library, which was the goal of one of these projects, was to build these small libraries for people in their community. And without this flexibility, students wouldn't have had the opportunity to make meaningful choices. And in this case, the 4-year-olds were making design choices. And so it's all about balance, how much choice, when and where, and so that students are still accomplishing their goals. Now, some of the approaches to PL have to do with technology, of course. And Ann Whitehair is an 8th grade English teacher at Oakwood Junior High School in Oakwood, Ohio. And as many teachers are, Ann Whitehair knows acutely the balance and struggle of not only meeting the demands of testing throughout the year with the drive to meet goals and ensure engagement, growth, and retention of learning. This is something that she calls stickiness. So while she wants to make sure that she is compliant with testing and sees the value of that, she also really worries about engagement and growth. And so to manage this balance, she knew technology would support this endeavor. She used a platform called ThinkCirca, a tool that provides a space for students to craft text-based arguments, allowing for learners to hone skills in critical thinking, reading comprehension, and writing. Since the program is built with a framework that aligns with the approach and pedagogy Whitehair uses without technology, integrating this platform was as close as she could have gotten to 100% engaged 100% of the time. So what I'm saying is it wasn't necessarily the tool that made this possible, but it was the tool's framework that aligned with her framework, and she was able to see success with that. There was synergy between her offline approach with the online support. She is extremely happy with this program because of that. It allows her students to get immediate feedback, set their own goals, and is repeatable but feels fresh, which is a must-have when thinking about keeping students engaged. However, she is not completely satisfied with the program's reading quiz. She supplements her self-created questionnaire, which helps her gauge students' approach and struggles with the assignment, a reflection per se to help them think beyond, did I get it right, or did I approach it the right way, and what could I have done differently? And so despite loving this program, she did have to augment it to fit the needs of that classroom, and I think that's a really important lesson that we can learn from her and other people that do that. And while there are tons of technology resources available, I think that this theme definitely helps anyone looking to see what works in the classroom. There are a bunch more articles in this category that you could look at for inspiration. I'm going to turn it back to Tony to talk about our third theme.
Thank you, Meg. And yes, our third theme, preparing teachers. It's everyone's favorite 8-syllable word, professional development. So often we hear that professional development for a teacher is delivered as, it can be delivered as a single mandatory session for the entire staff. When the reality is that everyone's needs, no matter how long you've been in the classroom, are going to be different, right? So first up, we have Desiree Alexander, who is an educator in Louisiana, who wrote about some tips for how to personalize professional development based on the faculty's needs and offering the support in the format that's best for them. What she shared in this article is how she starts with a needs assessment, and she uses something that's as simple as a Google form that asks teachers about the comfort and needs around things like classroom management, data aggregation, technology integration, culturally responsive pedagogy, or even have teachers suggest and share their own needs. And based on these responses, she says that the PD that she offers can be delivered in different formats. One of them includes having teachers create their own instructional videos for each other. And sometimes that can be done in collaboration with students as well, because the students often share a unique perspective that adults and teachers sometimes maybe miss on. Sometimes she will have her teachers run a webinar on some of their strengths using webinar tools like Google Hangout or Blackboard Collaborate, what we're using today. And she also suggests creating an online space where your teachers can communicate about their professional development and reflect on what they need and what they want from each other. So highly recommend checking out her article in our guide for to get more details about the tools and processes that she uses. Another piece along this theme explores how teachers are dealing with the overwhelming amounts of data that they get these days from different tools that are being used in classrooms, and how to effectively use that data to shape meaningful instructional practices. So we have Stacy Walker, who is the founding principal of Gem Prep Nampa. It's a school in Boise, Idaho. And what she shares, which is really interesting, is how she has her teachers hold weekly data conferences with her students. Before going into the deep end of the spreadsheets, she says that one of the keys is to make these goals as visible as students throughout the week in ways that are appropriate for the age and development. So for each learner, for each student, you make sure that you have, you set what the goals are and you share the best ways to track them. Her teachers eventually all found different ways to track the goals and create visuals for the students. In the kindergarten classes, sometimes that means physical folders and printed checklists. For her fourth graders, sometimes her teachers will create Google Slides with weekly updated screenshots of the data about the goal, and as well as slides for the students and teachers that they create and own and manage as they track their own goal. So what she's found is that these data constancies not only changes the relationship between students and teachers, but they can also change the relationship with the families and their school as well. And her experiences with creating a culture that proactively shares data is that you change these numbers and data from a closed-door conversation or a shaming experience to an inclusive conversation around how all learners can grow and develop and support each other. Finally, we have Lynn Colon, who is a principal of Mary Williams Elementary School in Virginia. And she shared how she draws inspiration from Disney World's customer-first approach in building a staff that puts students at the center of the experience. What she shared is that one of the keys is to making sure that she has the right team, even starting from the hiring level. And what she looks for is attitude just as much as aptitude. She writes that after all, some people may be really great educators in terms of knowing their subject materials really well, but ultimately may not be the best fit for the students. For example, can they relate to English language learners, or are they sensitive to students with special needs? These are the questions that matter, because part of the magic in creating, as running a school at Disney World, is to create inclusive experiences for all learners and students. Cologne also applies this customer-first approach to her staff as well. She uses the EdCamp model for professional development of her staff. And it's during these unconference sessions where there's no set plans, but rather teachers get to decide what they want to learn and what they'd like to help others learn. So that instead of being this force-fed, one-size-fits-all PD, the staff members get to know who to reach out and collaborate with after these sessions. Another key stakeholder are parents, and because parents also deserve to know how the schools and educators are using their resources and their time with the kids. And so during these school-wide events, she consistently asks them for feedback about ways to improve their school culture and processes, even going as far as calling them once a quarter to ask for their input and feedback along the way. So just a sampling of the collections of stories we have in this third theme around ways to prepare teachers for personalized learning. Take it back to you, Meg, to kind of wrap up the fourth theme of this year's project.
All right. So like all things in education, there are challenges along the way. And we've already heard about a few of the challenges people face. But the stories in this collection deal with some of the more prevalent challenges we've heard across the nation and really resonate with a lot of people. We're going to start with North Carolina. Angela Cooper teaches math at Research Triangle High School. It's a STEM charter school in Durham, North Carolina. And according to Angela, in a world of personalized learning, it's no longer okay for teachers to show and tell students how to solve problems, nor should they rely on complicated tech tools for instruction. Rather, for Cooper, it should be about allowing students to get there on their own, which requires both teacher and student mindset changes. And this is a challenge that's difficult to achieve and likely goes against what many teachers learn or have experienced in the past. For her, a mind shift came when she realized that math education needed to be less about giving students the facts and the math terms to memorize and process, and more about discovering math concepts that exist in her students' everyday lives, but also to use language that they understand to convey those concepts. And a key part to Cooper's process lies in letting students discuss and determine their own conclusions. And it was an exercise in restraint to tell them how to be able to do this. She really wanted to tell them how, but she needed to let them discover. And that takes a lot of effort if you haven't been doing that a lot. For her, personalized learning doesn't always take on specific form, but it always takes on a specific purpose, to meet her students exactly where they are and to give them what they need. And I think we can learn a lot from Angela in terms of this teacher mindset. We talk a lot about approaches and changing approaches, but changing mindset is very important as well. In Rhode Island, Roberto Gonzalez took a different approach to meeting the needs of his students. He's the executive director and founder of Steambox, which is a nonprofit that develops scientific and technology-based programming around the passions and interests of the student body. The reason Steambox exists is to empower the disengaged and disenfranchised. Steambox is a youth-led nonprofit designed to allow students to explore their passions through science, technology, engineering, art, and math projects. Everything at Steambox is student-led. They are essentially the boss of the program. The co-founders came from the local area schools that were failing, and they learned a lot from that experience, but they also met a lot of frustration, and Steambox was sort of their answer to this. They joined forces and aligned their approach to help students have more agency and control, something disadvantaged and underperforming students often need to succeed. The worst performing school in the area was now able to use Steambox as a more than a simple Band-Aid or intervention program. It changed the way students were learning. And the program was met with a lot of success, but then they faced a huge challenge. Their feeder school, the school that they were joining forces with, was closing. And the community, the parents of these students, the co-founders, their team, appealed to the school board for the school to stay open, partially because of the Steambox initiative. And so they got so much support from the Samsung Solve for Tomorrow challenge, it actually helped the school get back on its feet. And so a program that was designed for that very specific population actually helped a school get, saved from closing, which I think is pretty amazing. In Maryland, Kevin Cuppett is the Executive Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Innovation for Frederick County Public Schools. I've worked actually pretty closely with Frederick County and wanted to bring up their approach to facing challenges. So they have a pretty successful school district. It's very, very large. They have about 44,000 students, and they thought that personalized learning would really help enhance all student experiences. But in a large district, they struggled with how to go to scale. So according to Dr. Cuppett, whether a district has limited resources or in-house expertise, anyone can move toward personalized learning by using their district's approach as a blueprint. Their approach is informed by both theory and good work of their colleagues and partners across the nation. System-wide change is difficult. Their answer was to start small, in small curriculum projects as field tests. Their curriculum teams work directly with teachers and schools to solve specific instructional problems by designing a specific model of blended learning, building the classroom structures and instructional resources to support the model, learning and iterating together. The next step after they did these specific instructional problems was not to go to scale at the district. In fact, the next step for them was helping their team think about changing mindset and practices. They did this by building capacity on the curriculum team. They used the tenets outlined in Horton Staker's Blended book to guide their reframing of teaching and learning strategies. And then, since their preliminary results were promising, they had buy-in at the administrative level and vision. They decided to scale just to the 10th grade. So again, scaling even just in small increments was really important to them to make sure that they were doing the right thing along the way. The take-home message here is the folks at Frederick County aligned their vision with the team. They did research, they started small, and because of this process might take longer, they realized that, but they believe that the small steps have set them up for success. And so you have, everything here from, specific problems of practice within a classroom, schools that face, large issues around socioeconomic and disadvantaged students, and then you have, a successful, by any other means, county that also really wants to scale an innovative model. And these are just a few of the challenges that people face when implementing a new model or scaling a model that's working for them. All right, so now I'm going to hand it back to Tony to talk a little bit about our take-home messages here.
Yes, thanks a lot, Meg. I hope that you all kind of enjoyed some of the summary of the stories that we've shared in this project. Our intent, in the time allotted, was not to go super thorough and deep into each of the 50 stories. We just don't have time for that, but to hopefully give you enough of a teaser for you to go back to the 2017 50 States Project link and to explore some of these stories yourselves. Because what I hope that one of the takeaways that you've had is that there's no single definition or single way to do personalized learning right. And so when you go to our guide, you can see that we've organized the 50 stories along these 4 different themes. You can read them in detail, and we should have links to all the authors on the articles as well, and you should feel free to reach out to them, via Twitter or via their respective websites if you want to learn a little bit more about their practices. So I just shared the link, the bit.ly link again, to the landing page of the guide in the chat box. But to wrap up some of the broader lessons that we've learned from this year's 2017 50 States Project, going from left to right, I'll start with the top left quadrant. And I said this earlier that there's really not a black or a white either-or proposition, when it comes to defining personalized learning. And I think that's one of the key takeaway messages here. So often I think people can get hung up around like, is this personalized learning? Is that personalized learning? Am I personalizing learning? And that's, at a very high level, I think that question is just not, very helpful or informative about the specific instructional practices and relationships that are involved in your instructional craft. What we've learned is that technology, when it's used properly, it's in service of strengthening human relationships between a teacher and a student, or between teachers and each other, or between educators and the broader community of families and parents that they serve. What we've learned is that, personalized learning relationships, they extend beyond schools sometimes and into homes, into communities, and they're very also responsive to the unique cultural and local needs of each environment and community. When it comes to preparing teachers, there are the online tools afford us a lot of different mediums and formats through which educators can learn about what each other's needs are and help communicate and talk and gather around the different needs, strengths, and weaknesses of each other's instructional practice. There's a lot of data, and many of the teachers that we profiled or who wrote for this piece wrote about the importance of investing in time to make data relevant and meaningful for learners. We learned that attitude can just be as important as aptitude when it comes to your relationships, developing personal relationships with students, and sometimes use parents. Parents in the community can be your allies as well when it comes to finding ways to find that right way to engage with the students meaningfully.
When we talk about approaches in technology, I talked a lot about student-driven lesson plans and activities. Those seem to be, what teachers are doing in the classrooms. We talked about shifting teachers' roles from into more of a facilitator role. The stories talk a lot about school-wide changes and different approaches in order to do that. And as unique as each of your students is, I also believe that schools are pretty unique and that school-wide changes aren't going to be the same across even the state or even the district. But I didn't mention this particularly, but the role of technology in PL is controversial. Most people agree that just saying that you have a 1-to-1 ratio of laptops to students does not make a PL initiative. But it's really a thoughtful rollout of how the devices might be able to help and support student learning and teaching. And part of that is addressing like specific software or having specific tools that make teaching and learning more effective and efficient. And the challenge is, many PL champions agree that providing voice and choice to student experience is ideal, but many times that involves shifting teacher mindsets about their role in the classroom. It isn't enough to value voice and choice. Teachers need to curate experiences or change from traditional pedagogy to make space for this. Where they aren't the ones with the answers, and often as the stories show, educators may be uncomfortable with this shift. As it was said before, system-wide adoption of scaling PL is difficult. However, those that are most successful, as outlined in a lot of these stories, have school-wide buy-in, but a shared vision, but expect change to happen slowly and incrementally. Again, buying new software or devices doesn't need to happen to make personalized learning happen, but sure, it can support and many times make teaching and learning more efficient. But that's because of sound pedagogy implemented by expert teachers who lead the change with focused learning goals. And like I said at the beginning, many approaches to personalized learning aren't new. Special education teachers have been writing IEPs for decades and has targeted intervention strategies and project-based learning approaches. And successful schools and districts know this, but use these methods to inform their PL initiatives. These are just some of the big takeaways we've learned from this project, and there are many more, which is why I'd like to give you a sneak peek into a resource we're creating to house these stories to make it easier for educators to find the resources we need, or we all need. So what you're seeing here is a sneak peek of a microsite that we are designing to showcase these stories in a different way. You can go and look at the guide already compiled that Tony sent the link to. And but this is going to be a microsite where you're able to click on a region and then search stories based on that region. You will be able to filter and narrow down by personalized learning attribute. So if it says like blended learning, you want to learn about blended learning, you can, or if you are looking specifically for something around student agency, you'll be able to click a thing by that. And that is launching in November, so pay close attention. We'll be making a big deal about that coming up. Additionally, there's a lot going on around personalized learning, and we're hosting in-person events, and I wanted to just give a quick plug. I know we have to save time for questions, but we have these things called Tech Leaders Circles, and they're designed, this iteration is designed to bring teachers together, educators together, administrators and teachers, to talk about problems of practice in person about these things. So imagine you could talk to any one of these writers in person and pick their brain. That's what they're for. They're free events. They are about 2 hours. They're really fun. I'm one of the hosts, and I'm coming to Virginia people, Richmond in November. I'm also going to DC and right before that in Maryland. I'm going to Fort Lauderdale. We're trying to do one in every city. So you can sign up. There is a link there if you want to sign up for one. They're really fun. In a couple of weeks, we are also hosting the first ever EdSurge Fusion Conference, and that's going to be a really amazing conference where people will get together to think through teaching and learning practices through really specific and curated tracks. We have vision, research, evidence, and vision. Did I say vision already? I forget what the last one is. But anyway, to learn more, click on that link. We're really excited about it, and it's just another way to interact with people in person because we know that that's important.
Great, yeah, and I don't know if you can click on those slides, but I dropped in short links to these different events that you can check out and learn more about and register in the chat box. as the last one. So. Yeah, I believe at this point we've got, well, we're right on time. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. And so if any of you have, any questions about our work or what we've learned, I think you can drop them into the chat box. Is that correct, Natalie?
Yes, thank you both so very much. How informative and really, really tremendous stories. And I'm excited to see your microsite here in another month or so. That's really exciting news. All right, well, let's certainly open it up for questions. If you have questions for our presenters today, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. We had one question early on, I believe from Jennifer, and she asked, how do you teach students to be self-directed in regards to personalized learning? So I'm wondering if you have any stories or can think of any insights from teachers or leaders you may have met on how to cultivate and develop that self-directed learning in students.
Can you repeat the first part of the question again?
Sure. How do you teach students to be self-directed learners with personalized learning?
That's a really, really good question. I think from some of the approaches that people have told me over the times, especially at these tech leader circles or when I've been on the phone with administrators, a lot of it has to just come from, modeling, of course, but also just building it into the culture over time. And I think to expect it to announce on day one, you guys are going to take ownership of your classroom is probably not going to work. I think that the best would be if people see it being represented in other aspects. So I think, I'm sure there are other people on here who are much better equipped to answer this question, but I think teaching agency and teaching is to do it in small bits first, give them ownership and agency over small things, and then that can lead to bigger things over time.
Yeah, I could add to that a little bit. I think that, one of the stories I shared earlier has one of the teachers wrote about the importance of setting the proper goals for each student that is, that ties to something that they care about, some of their passion and some of their interest. And then once you set these goals, figure out a way to, reflect them or track them. I think that was one of the pieces around the data conferences that I talked about a little bit earlier. Let me go back to that. Stacy Walker. And so I think, once you find that special something that really connects to what a student's passionate about, we create a way to help them track and measure their own progress along those goals as well. And I think that building a culture where data is it's a very open and supportive conversation rather than a very punitive, compliance-driven activity, was key to her, helping to build that level of motivation and accountability with her students.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to point out that Carolyn Berenson had a great suggestion in the chat where she says working on creating a safe environment where students feel comfortable making risks or taking risks and help with initiative. And I think, if you can restructure the conversation to be not so much about, cumulative performance and more about process, then students are going to feel a lot more comfortable as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Jennifer in the chat box asked if anyone was aware of a middle school using the PCBE model and willing to share resources. So Jennifer, I think you might mean a personalized competency-based education model, but I'm not positive if that's what that acronym stands for. So if anybody has any resources to help Jennifer out, or know of any middle schools doing this work, please feel free to share any information you might have in the chat box. And I'm not sure if our presenters might have any responses to that or not.
I would check with any people who are from New Hampshire might be able to address some of the CBE shifting. There's a lot of activity going on there around competency-based education. And so if there's anyone from New Hampshire on, definitely check with them. If otherwise, maybe check the DOE there. I think they have a list of schools that are actually doing CBE.
Yeah, I think one of our former colleagues wrote an article about this last year, and I think coincidentally it came from April because she, I think, counted that 35 out of the 200 sessions at last year's April conference had the word competency-based learning in the session titles. You know, so yeah, I shared a link to that article in the chat box. It has some quotes and insights from different educators who are trying to make it happen, along with links to their resources. So hopefully that could help you, that might help you out.
Great, thank you. And Caroline shared a great book in the chat box as well, if anybody's interested in checking that out. I haven't seen any further questions come in, so if you have any last-minute questions, go ahead and add them into the chat box. And otherwise, we can wrap up for today. Just a quick plug, I know Meg mentioned it early on in today's presentation, but the iNACOL Symposium is less than 2 weeks away, so if you're interested in attending, feel free to check out the sessions and pre-conference workshops and a lot of other great information on our website, and you can register to attend there as well. We hope to see you in sunny Orlando in just a couple weeks, and we hope to see you at EdSurge's events coming up too. It's really great to see local and regional events as well, where we go to educators. So really looking forward to it, and we hope that you can all attend. And otherwise, I would just like to extend my sincerest thanks to our presenters today. That was a really fantastic presentation and overview of what's happening across the country and these pockets of innovation and school leaders and educators taking on this great work to do what's best for kids. So we thank you for doing this research and for presenting for us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Meg, and thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. I really appreciate the opportunity to share what we've learned in these stories, which are really the stories and voices from teachers and educators across the country around the excellent work and lessons that they've learned in the course of trying to personalize their instructional practices. So with that, we'll be signing off, but check out EdSurge.com if you want to stay updated on other stories about the education technology community. As always, my email is tony@edsurge.com. Meg is just at meg@edsurge.com if you want to reach out to us for any questions. So have a great day, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Bye, guys.